So in this video, we are going to take the idea of solving quadratic equations, as well as finding the y-intercept and the vertex to sketch the parabola. So in this example, I want to sketch y equals x squared plus 2x minus 3. So the first thing we are going to do is find the x-intercepts. To find the x-intercepts, it is the same thing as solving that quadratic equation. So what I'm going to do is substitute in 0 for y, because our x-intercepts occur along the x-axis when the y value is 0. So that is our solutions to this quadratic equation. So I have to write 0 equals x squared plus 2x minus 3. Again, I want to emphasize this 0. If you do not write that 0 on a test, you will lose a mark. So now I recognize that this is a simple quadratic to factor. So I need two numbers that multiply to -3 and add to 2. So that's x plus 3 and x minus 1. And then I will take each bracket and set that factor equal to 0. So I get x equals -3 and x equals +1. So those are my two x-intercepts. And if you were to write them in coordinate form, you would write -3, 0 and 1, 0. So we're now going to find the y-intercept. The y-intercept occurs along the y-axis, and that is when your x value is 0. So we are going to substitute in 0 for x. So I get 0 squared plus 2 times 0 minus 3. So y equals 3. And in coordinate form, that would be 0, 3. So I have highlighted my two x-intercepts and my one y-intercept, but before I graph, I need to find my vertex. You would have seen a couple different ways to find the vertex. A common method is to complete the square and put your quadratic equation into vertex form. And we will see that in a later lesson. But today, since we found our x-intercepts, we're going to use the idea of symmetry to find the vertex. I use the letters H and V to represent the vertex. H says horizontal shift and V says the vertical shift. You may have used different letters like H and K or P and Q, but try to get used to using the letters H and V because that will come in handy when we look at our second unit. So what I'm going to do is find the value of H, which is our axis of symmetry, and I'm going to do that by adding our two x-intercepts together. So -3 plus 1 and dividing by 2. So I'm taking the average, which is -1. So our h value is -1, and that is also our axis of symmetry. Next, to find the v value, or the y value of your vertex, I'm going to sub in our x value of -1 into the quadratic equation. So where x is now -1. So now when I simplify that, I get 1 minus 2 minus 3, which simplifies to v equals -4. So my vertex has the coordinates -1, -4. So I've highlighted that point as that is another key point for my graph. So now I'm going to plot these 4 points on my graph as well as the axis of symmetry. So there I have my 4 main points. I've highlighted them in the same colors that I used before. So the yellow represents my two x-intercepts, the green is my y-intercept, and the red is my vertex. And now what you should do is draw your axis of symmetry, which is that vertical line that goes down through the middle of your vertex, cuts your graph in half, so it should go in between your two x-intercepts. We can also reflect our y-intercept. So over here, I can reflect it. So I get another point that will just help my accuracy of my graph. And then you draw a nice curve through all your points with arrows at the end. I would expect you to use a ruler on yours on paper. It's hard for me to do that on a video. And also make sure your point, it's not a V shape, it's a nice curved shape. And we did not use the step pattern in this question. We're going to do that once we use vertex form. So we'll see that in another video. So now in this question, I want to factor this quadratic. So again, I'm going to start off by finding the x-intercepts and setting the y value equal to 0. So as always, I look for a common factor. There is one in this quadratic, so I'm going to factor out -2. I am left with x squared minus 6x plus 5. And now I have this trinomial that I'm going to factor. I want two numbers that multiply to positive 5 and add to -6. So those are -5 and -1. So my factors are going to be x minus 5, x minus 1. And now I take my two brackets, my factors only, and I set those equal to 0. So I get x equals 5 and x equals 1. So I just want to talk about this -2. This is my a value. It affects the opening and stretch and compression of my graph. If you were using the step method to graph this, that would be a very important number, but we are not using that method. But it is good to note that this is negative, so my graph, my parabola, will open down. This -2 does not affect my x-intercepts, and that is basically because I could divide both sides by -2. 0 divided by -2 is still 0. So we factored it out, and we only take our two factors and set those two values equal to 0. So again, we have two x-intercepts. Now to find my y-intercepts, I'm going to substitute in 0 for x. So I have -2 times 0 squared plus 12 times 0 minus 10. This term becomes 0, this term becomes 0, and I'm left with -10. And I should write these as coordinates, so 0, -10. And same with my x-intercepts. I should write those as coordinates, 5, 0, and 1, 0. So I've highlighted my three main points that I found so far, and now I'm going to find the vertex. So to find the vertex, I want to find the axis of symmetry, which is when I take the average of the two x-intercepts. So I'm going to add 5 plus 1 divided by 2. So h is equal to 3. And then I want to find my y value at that point. So my v is -2 times 3 squared plus 12 times 3 minus 10. When I simplify that, I get -18 plus 36 minus 10, which is equal to 8. So there's my vertex, 3, 8. So now, again, I'm going to plot these 4 points on my graph, draw the axis of symmetry, and then draw a nice parabola. So there are my 4 points drawn. And again, with the ruler, draw your axis of symmetry. Reflect any points that you have. So my x-intercepts are reflected, so I'm going to reflect my y-intercept. So I have another point here. And then it looks like the parabola opens down, which I knew it would because of that -2a value. So then I draw a nice parabola with arrows at the end. And for full communication marks, you should always label the equation of your graph on your grid.